there, friends, and welcome to our final message in this series, Good Grief, that we've been doing now for these number of weeks. Today is kind of a culmination of all the different weeks, and once again, I want to say I'm sorry that maybe you weren't able to join us in person. At the end of the message today, in person at the building, we're going to have a special way of kind of responding, and I'd love for you to find a way to do it as well at your home or wherever you're watching this. So we'll get to that when we get to that. But today I want to talk to you about the power of lament. Now, maybe you're not familiar with that word as much, and actually my wife recommended a really good book. It was a good recommendation of hers, Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy, that I'm going to reference a couple times. But in this book, when he talks about lament, he says that lament is how we tunnel our way to hope. I love that picture. Honestly, as I read it, it made me think of, it just made me picture Shawshank Redemption. I'm not sure if you've ever seen that movie. I love it. It's one of my favorite movies. I know why it's highly recommended and highly rated and all that, because it's just such a good story, such good acting, but such a good story. And I'm thinking of that part where he has to tunnel through the sewers to get out to freedom and hope, and what it looks like for you and I to tunnel through our grief and our sorrow to really get to a place of healing and hope. See, because lament takes, as we're going to find today, all that we've learned in this series so far to a really critical place, and that's bringing our grief to God. You know, remember how God says in 1 Peter 5:7 tells us to cast all of our cares on Him because He cares for us? Well, this lament is how we cast. Lament is then, it's more than just talking about our sadness or even walking through the stages of grief. It's a prayer in pain that leads to trust, specifically trust in God. See, as you're going to see today, lament is inherently Christian. I say that because it rises from this belief in the character of God, an understanding of the brokenness of sin, and then a heartfelt longing for the completion of God's redemptive plan in the world. And it can be, as we've talked about in the series already, it can be very natural at times for some of us to cry, maybe even automatic to cry at some points when sorrow hits us. But lament isn't actually natural or automatic. It's an intentional practice that we decide to do, one that's all throughout Scripture. I mean, we're going to see today, it's all throughout Scripture. In fact, we're only going to look at a portion of it, a small part, but this is God's pattern for processing our pain. I want to read to you a quote, one more quote from this book, where he says, "The practice of lament, the kind that is biblical, honest, and redemptive, is not as natural for us, because every lament is a prayer, a statement of faith. Lament is the honest cry of a hurting heart wrestling with the paradox of pain and the promise of God's goodness." Now, that's a paradox that we sometimes struggle with, isn't it? The paradox of pain and the promise of God's goodness. In fact, I think because some Christians don't know about lament and haven't been taught how to lament, they end up thinking they only ever have two options, really, with their deep sorrows, and that's anger or denial. Is this maybe what's shipwrecking the faith of some people? Is that they've got the sense of, my options are either I get angry and really angry at God and frustrated and leave maybe God and my faith for all the junk that's going on in my life, or I can maybe act like nothing is really that bad, it's just kind of okay, it's not as bad maybe, and then eventually get fed up with playing it down and acting like it's not that big of a deal, and then leave God. You know what? Maybe if through lament, people were taught to voice their most raw frustrations to God in a constructive way, they might actually find their faith instead of losing what little faith they had in that moment. I really believe it. And that's what's so critical about today. See, last week we talked about, if you were with us, we talked about the need for each other and how we can come alongside others who are grieving. And that's great, but our theology of grieving fortunately involves also a God who we can go to, a God who, as we talked about in week 1, sees us. Our theology of grieving fortunately involves the value of other people but doesn't rely on them. We have a Heavenly Father, and that's a distinct distinction in how we process our pains in this life. See, God's given us, in His Word, psalms of lament, books, whole books of lament, passages where people lament. And that's important because we need a framework, a God-centered structure, so that we can avoid the trap of self-centeredness, which loves to like set its roots down in us when we're grieving and when we're in sorrow and deep sadness. Lament invites expression, but only the kind with the right objective. And in a sense, one of the things I love that the author of that book says is that we kind of need the boundary of biblical language to keep our laments on track. And I want to give us one example here today that I think, just one, I'm going to read one whole psalm of lament. We'll peek into some other ones later on, but this one we're going to read the whole way through. Psalm 6. O Lord, rebuke me not in your anger, nor discipline me in your wrath. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am languishing. Heal me, O Lord, for my bones are troubled. My soul also is greatly troubled, but you, O Lord, how long? Turn, O Lord, deliver my life. Save me for the sake of your steadfast love. For in death there is no remembrance of you. In Sheol, who will give you praise? I am weary with my moaning. Every night I flood my bed with tears. I drench my couch with my weeping. My eye wastes away because of grief. It grows weak because of all my foes. Depart from me, all you workers of evil, for the Lord has heard the sound of my weeping. The Lord has heard my plea. The Lord accepts my prayer. All my enemies shall be ashamed and greatly troubled. They shall turn back and be put to shame in a moment. I want to talk to you today about the 4 pieces of lament. And just so you know, these 4 pieces are each of them so important. And it's not so much important in the order, but I'm just going to go in a certain order here. But I want you to maybe take note of these 4 pieces of biblical lament. The first one is bring your grievance to God. A lament has you honestly and specifically naming the problem that you're having, the sorrow that you're dealing with, the loss that you're feeling, whatever's painful, wrong, or just seems unjust. In other words, a circumstance that doesn't align with God's character and therefore doesn't make sense within God's kingdom. We're talking about that in this moment. We're talking about this. So this is just not right. This is wrong. This hurts. And that can be short or it can be long. It doesn't matter. It just matters that you say it, whatever, however long you say it, that you say it and that you say it to God. You're bringing this to God and you're going, God, this hurts. Let me give you some examples here as we see them in some of the Psalms of Lament. Psalms 10 says, in arrogance, the wicked hotly pursue the poor. And then in Psalm 3, O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. Selah. Psalm 64 says, hear my voice, O God, in my complaint. Preserve my life from dread of the enemy. Psalm 123:4 says, our soul has had more than enough of the scorn of those who are at ease, of the contempt of the proud. Now, sometimes we have these rules against these kinds of things, rules against certain forms of emotion and taking them to God, or even how we talk to God about them. For instance, some people might think we should only always ever be grateful. So don't talk to God about your complaints because don't you know how good he's been to you? And it's true. I mean, God has been good to us, but avoiding sorrow doesn't make us better Christians or even better humans. You lose something. You miss out. And often you risk, if I'm being honest with you this morning, you risk things getting worse. Like a wound that doesn't get taken seriously and it ends up getting infected because you just didn't really deal with it. Pain is inevitable, as we talked about earlier in the series, but like I said earlier as well, but to grieve is a choice. And to grieve well is an important choice because it's how we'll ever find healing for our hurting, restoration for our brokenness. And it begins with us pouring out our hearts before God about our hurts, honestly, and letting him know what is wrong. I love that Psalm 62 says it this way, trust in him at all times, O people, pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us, Selah. So it could be you're lamenting a death, a betrayal, a trauma that you faced recently or a long time ago. Maybe a divorce, your singleness, a wayward child, a strained relationship, family, friend, whatever it might be, a fear or a worry that you have in your life, whatever it is. Even corporately, there's times in the Bible where there's corporate lament, and we can and we should corporately lament things like tornadoes ravaging towns, or injustice, or sinfulness being celebrated and championed. things like that. In this element of the lament, it's important to really come to God with a junk and not hold back. But the good news is we don't stay here. If you don't move beyond complaint and grievance, lament ends up losing its power. So the second thing is to ask questions honestly. Now I want you to notice the variety that we'll see in some of the Psalms of lament. Back to chapter 10 of Psalms. Why, O Lord, do you stand far away? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? Psalm 13. How long, O Lord? That's a common one. How long, how long? How long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Psalm 77. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Are his promises at an end for all time? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? Selah. Psalm 22. My God, we quoted this one earlier in the series. Why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? You know, this is when we go down a layer to wrestle with the underlying questions that come with our pain. Questions that we may not even realize until we're sitting down, maybe writing this out and processing it, questions that we may not realize we even had. But the questions that no matter what are helpful for us to ask. Because in a sense, we're moving down and tunneling deeper to hope because we're calling out specifically what this hurt that we're going through is making us question about God, about his character, about ourselves, about life, things like that. I'm wondering if God cares. I'm wondering, how long is this going to last? Will I make it? Am I the only one? Can there be hope for me? Have I gone too far? Whatever the question is, we're asking those questions. We're vocalizing those questions that we have. So ask the questions. And it's okay, as you may have seen there, to have more than one or two, or to ask them the same kind of question, but a couple different ways. All right, then the third part is then we make requests boldly. Sometimes as I'm reading the laments, getting ready for today and all that, I'm struck by just how bold the requests are. I mean, they're kind of bold, but this is what moves lament from those questions of why to the questions of who. Because it's in asking God to do something that we're once again pulling ourselves towards Jesus in our grieving. It's with faith. Even if it's just like the mustard seed kind of faith, you know, that little mustard seed amount that we cry out to God to do something. And something based on his character or based on what we know of his desires or based on his past track record personally for us or what we see in Scripture. You know, let me read some examples here. Psalm 43. Vindicate me, O God, and defend my cause against an ungodly people, and from the deceitful and unjust man deliver me. Send out your light and your truth. Let them lead me. Let them bring me to your holy hill and to your dwelling. 59, Psalm 59. Deliver me from my enemies, O my God. Protect me from those who rise up against me. Let them, in chapter 70, let them be put to shame and confusion who seek my life. Let them be turned back and brought to dishonor who delight in my hurt. And then Psalm 25. For your name's sake, O Lord, pardon my guilt, for it is great. So you're seeing here that sometimes the thing that's being lamented is something that's being done or something we've done. Like he's talking about his guilt there. But we're asking God. We're making the request. What's interesting is that it's in this element that we see a view of God eclipsing our complaints and our grievances. Now, eclipsing is an important word here because it's not like the pain has just gone away or our questions are answered before we move into making our requests. But just like in eclipses when there's like the sun, moon, or whatever, like when one heavenly body can eclipse the other one by getting in front of it, God becomes the more prominent reality in this moment, in this element, even in the persistence of our questions. We come to the Father and we plead with him to help us. And we go, God, the God who sees me, help me. And then the fourth thing, and this is so critical, the fourth and final element of biblical lament is to remember or affirm your trust. And this is where lament, biblical lament, helps us to create bridges to hope rather than just cruising in the cul-de-sacs of sorrow. And this is what I like to call the mighty power of yet. It's not always the word specifically yet in the Psalms of Lament and all that. Sometimes it'll be words like but or nevertheless or even so or still. Whatever it is, it's still the concept is always the same. Basically, it's this: Lord, I've got some issues here. Here they are. These are my issues. Do you see it? Do you care? What are you going to do? Come make this right. Change my situation. Yet, I still trust you. You won't abandon me. No matter what happens today, I'm still hoping in you. See, this is the part where lament shows its true colors, where we hold in one hand the very real hurts of life with very real hope and trust. This is where we stand in the gap between pain and promise. And we see that trusting in God and experiencing deep sorrow are not actually mutually exclusive. You can trust in God and still have deep sorrow. Instead, what we do is we cry out our complaint to God with faith that He actually hears it. And we remember at the end who He is and what He says, despite what we're seeing or maybe despite what we're feeling. Let me give you some examples of this as the psalmist write it out. Psalm 71 says, "But I will hope continually and will praise you yet more and more. My mouth will tell of your righteous acts, of your deeds of salvation all the day, for their number is past my knowledge. With the mighty deeds of the Lord I will come. I will remind them of your righteousness, yours alone." Psalm 74. "Yet God my King is from of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth." Psalm 13. "But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because He has dealt bountifully with me." And then Psalm 31. "I had said in my alarm, I am cut off from your sight. But you heard the voice of my pleas for mercy when I cried to you for help." In fact, I want to share something with you. There's a short but powerful little book in the Old Testament called Lamentations. The book, as short as it is, but it's all a lament. It basically laments the sinful direction and then the resulting destruction of Israel. It had gotten bad, like really, really bad. And just look at this ambidextrous approach here in these few verses, Lamentations 3:20-22. The writer says, "I will never forget this awful time." Like looking at the destruction that their sin as a nation had caused them, and all, "I will never forget this awful time as I grieve over my loss. Yet," there's that mighty power of yet, "yet I still dare to hope when I remember this. The faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercy never ceases." I still dare to hope. See, Christians grieve, but we also lament. And in that lamenting, we dare to hope. We lament expectantly. That's why lament is so dang powerful. It's a fitting language for loss, a solution for silence, a category for complaints, a helpful framework for feelings, a process for our pain, and it's a way for us to worship. You don't need to ignore your problems. You don't need positive vibes to help you get through your sorrow, and you don't need to be crushed by your hurt either. Instead, it's critical that we acknowledge them, articulate them, feel them, and redirect them to Jesus. I love what the author of Hebrews says about Jesus. "Let us then, with confidence, draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in time of need." But you know what's interesting? That's verse 16. I love why we can, with confidence, draw near to the throne of grace and receive mercy and grace to help us in our time of need. Because verse 15 says, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin." See, Jesus, throughout his ministry, he would quote actually the Psalms a lot. You know what's interesting? A lot of the Psalms he quoted were Psalms of lament. They weren't the praise choruses, they were the sorrow ones. Jesus did that because he suffered, and he grieved in that suffering. He hurt, and he knew the way and wanted to show us the way to tunnel his way to hope. You know, there's a quote that I read many years ago by F.W. Robertson, and he says, "In expression, there is relief." And I think that's why it's powerful for you to take a moment just right now, and I want to invite you to experience some of that relief by expressing your own lament. I'd love for you to take maybe a moment and just write down on your phone or maybe on a piece of paper somewhere, but a little bit of your lament. Bring your grievance to God. Ask those questions boldly. Make requests boldly. And then go ahead and reaffirm your trust. Remember the goodness of God. And as you, again, the order doesn't matter. So you can start with a one and you can begin and end wherever you want. But as you write a lament for whatever it is that you're going through, whether it's big or small, I think it's important because even if it is small, the cool thing about learning how to lament, learning how to take our grievances to God this way, which isn't natural for us. I'm asking you to do something that isn't necessarily natural, but it's so important. And the reason why it's important even when it's small is that you begin to learn how to appropriately speak in the language of loss in a way that brings hope. And I think that's what we all want, right? We all need is hope that Jesus is going to make things right. But it doesn't mean denying it. It means really letting him hear what's going on and letting him meet us in it. So I want to invite you to, after this video is done here, take some time, spend it with the Lord. Pour out your heart to him because he cares for you. And I hope and I trust that God will meet you as you lament in a special way that he wouldn't be able to meet you in any other way. It's my prayer for you today.